Hey, friends, welcome again to the Alpha and Omega from the Flood to the Future podcast. Today I have Dr. Kingman with me. I'm very excited. We're going to be doing an interview style podcast with his expertise. Doc, how about introducing yourself just a bit?
Yes. Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yes, Dr. Gil Kingman. So I am a medical doctor, actually a surgeon. I do plastic and reconstructive surgery. And I have long had an interest in apologetics, and that's what's brought me to the podcast.
Awesome. Very good. So, just a quick reminder for those that tune in, this is on segment 10. We had a lot of talking points from living creatures versus plants. We talked about the limitation of kinds. We talked about the creation of man and what that looks like formed being versus being created. We looked at DNA information, genetic information. We looked at the problem of death and evolution, irreducible complexity, von Neumann machines, and on and on. So we've got a few things to cover. We won't be able to cover everything from that podcast, but we're going to touch on some things that generate some good conversation and questions that came up from that. So the first thing really that a lot of people have questions on is what's known as the limitation of kinds, and I put that in air quotes because so many people will say um, all of these species we see in the world, and Genesis makes it clear, and it appears 10 times in Genesis 1 after their kind, implying a genetic limitation on variation. So I'm going to turn to my friend here and ask him a couple of easy, brief questions on this to help folks out there to understand it a bit better. Microevolution versus macroevolution and variations within a kind. How would you describe that to somebody or help them understand it better?
Yes, well, microevolution, it's a term I've never really liked very much. The term evolution within that can be a little bit confusing, but the idea is that the classic idea is that of Darwin's finches. So Darwin describes some finches on the Galapagos Islands that developed large, hard beaks during the dry season,
Hmm.
and during the rainy season, the birds with smaller beaks actually flourished. And what was found was during the dry season, the seeds, the food for the birds, were very dry and large and hard to get into. So the birds with the larger beaks flourished. During the rainy season, the seeds were easier to get into, so the birds with the smaller beaks flourished.
Hmm.
Now, the birds themselves didn't change beaks. What was happening was the birds with the smaller beaks, kind of died out to some extent during the dry season. And so the genetic information was there to make either kind of beak.
Hmm.
But in the end, people have to understand, well, that is kind of a change within that species of bird, but they're still birds.
Yeah.
They're still finches.
So you would say that that's more adaptation and not a mutation?
Correct. That's more adaptation. That's information that's already there, that's brought out. There's no changes in the DNA that's bringing about those changes. That's information that's already there, and it's brought out by the selective pressure, if you will, of the dry season versus the rainy season.
Okay, so there might be within this kind of bird different species that develop through adaptation, but the bird doesn't change into a monkey or a dog or something like that.
That's exactly right. And any species that develops, and even species, there are multiple different definitions for species.
Yeah.
We would say, well, species can't interbreed. Well, you have had a horse and a donkey interbreed, and they're considered separate species. So those lines can get kind of blurry.
Yeah, but they fall within the same kind, you would say.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
Exactly right.
Okay, so awesome. The problem of death and evolution. So there's this idea of theistic evolution. Some people would refer to it as progressive creationism, and it's the idea that God uses, He created, then He uses evolution for man to progress and develop through the evolutionary, macroevolutionary process. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say in this case, now we'll go back to the Bible, basically what the Bible says.
Yeah.
There was sin first, and it's sin that brought death into the
Yes.
world. And so the progressive creationists would say, well, humans came along many millions of years later, and at some point, these human type people became men, or that's when God breathed really his breath into them. The problem is the fossil record shows lots of cancers
Yeah.
and other diseases in the fossils. And then the thought is, well, why was there all that death and suffering before any sin happened?
Yeah.
There's just no way to square that with either Old or New Testament.
Yeah, with scripture for sure, because it says, according to Genesis, death did not enter the world until man sinned. So,
Exactly.
yeah, awesome, very good. So then, irreducible complexity, and also what's known as von Neumann machines. So these are living organisms, kind of self-producing, self-sustaining, self repairing machines. Can you help us understand that just a bit better?
Yeah, well, irreducible complexity, I think, is a term that was coined by Dr. Michael Behe in his book Darwin's Black Box. And it has the idea, it looks at the issue of evolution with the idea that evolution is a stepwise process. Well, if you take that backwards, you get to a point where the organism doesn't exist, right? If it's adding new parts, there's a time where it's not the organism. And what he uses is the example of a mousetrap, a
Yeah,
very simple machine. It's got these four parts, basically, the platform, the hook, the hammer, and the spring. And if you evolutionize that backwards and say, okay, what are we going to take away? Well, then it's not a mousetrap anymore. It
yeah,
doesn't function.
yeah,
And so what would keep that organism around to get to the next step? That just,
yeah,
hasn't been answered.
yeah,
And what we see now is with the complexity regarding the von Neumann machines, I mean, you could go to YouTube and look up life inside the cell and see this amazing animation
yeah,
that uh, nanotechnology where these organisms repair themselves and replicate. It's just quite a sight. And these things you'll see, they're not made at Christian universities. This is Harvard and other secular universities
yeah,
that say, oh no, this is what goes inside,
yeah.
what goes on inside the cell.
And compared to a mousetrap, that's a
Sure,
whole lot more complexity
my
than a
goodness,
mousetrap would be.
that's
And,
right.
and you can't even narrow down irreducible complexity and a mousetrap to say it just popped into existence by itself out of some random chance.
Exactly. I mean, some skeptics would say, well, you could envision where a platform and a spring and a hammer are kind of lying around, and then all of a sudden they just self-assemble and they become a mousetrap. Well, like,
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
on, that's nonsensical. Why would that happen?
Exactly, exactly. I've heard the expression too is kind of like putting all the parts for a jumbo 747 in a big machine that you can, rumble around, and then out comes this 747. And a
Exactly.
cell, I would argue, is way more complex than even a 747.
Oh, way more. A cell is like a factory, and really multiple factories. You could even call it a city.
Yeah.
Some cells.
Yeah, so that leads us straight into the biological functions of a single cell that resemble a high-tech factory. I mean, it has central memory banks for information, precise control systems for assembly, proofreading mechanisms, all that kind of stuff. And this level of complexity in a simple cell was unknown to Darwin. What might you say to Darwin if you had the opportunity to talk to him today?
Well, certainly he didn't have the benefit of even basic genetics that is so that we have with us today, and then all these amazing complexities in the cell.
Mhm.
I'm going to read a quote here from Darwin, and I
Sure.
think I can expose his fatal flaw.
Yeah.
So, on the origin of species, this is a quote from his book. Slow though the process of selection may be, if feeble man can do much by artificial selection, I can see no limit to the amount of change to the beauty and complexity of the co-adaptations between all organic beings, which may have been affected in the long course of time through nature's power of selection.
Yeah.
Now, Darwin himself did some artificial selection with pigeons, so he could breed pigeons for certain colors or whatever. So he's thinking, look, if I can do this and if we can breed artificially, imagine what time could do over billions of years.
Yeah.
Well, there's the flaw. I mean, he
Right.
can do all the breeding within the pigeons and the finches, and they're still pigeons and finches.
Right.
But he's making a huge leap there to say, well, imagine that we can get one single celled animal to evolve into a mammal. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just way too big a leap.
So he's doing the old bait and switch, taking microevolution and then applying it to macroevolution, which just does they don't jive whatsoever.
Exactly. That's why I don't like the term microevolution so much. I think, let's just get evolution out of there and
Sure.
call it adaptation because that's what it is. They
Right.
adapt to the surroundings, the selective pressures.
Right. And I think when it comes to the information, genetic information, DNA, it's not just a biological molecule, but it's a sophisticated system for storing and retrieving huge amounts of information, enough genetic information in 1 teaspoon for all of the information on the internet. And then every book of every word of every book ever written.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
Yes, sir.
And it is information. And there's been no other example in human history where information comes from anything but an intelligent, willful mind.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, would you say software? The
Software, indeed. Bill Gates has said the same. Francis Collins, former head of the NIH, wrote a book called The Language of God. It's actually a language.
yeah, absolutely. And then self-repairing systems, even. I know you deal with a lot of injuries and you help people through surgery get over those, but that only takes you so far, correct?
Exactly. God has put into place these amazing systems and these amazing cascade. Let's look at wound healing for one thing. There's a cascade of wound healing. When the wound is initially injured, collagen gets exposed, one chemical gets made, that leads to another chemical getting made, that leads to these tiny things getting built to cross the wound to start closing it. And it's one sequence at a time, and it's always the same. And in fact, when that doesn't work well, people have trouble. I can do all the sewing I want and get things together to optimize healing, but if those biological steps don't happen, then my work is for naught.
Yeah, and you
Mhm.
do great work, so we don't want that to be for naught. So
That's right.
thank goodness for God's creation.
That's right.
And then probably the last thing really to address that some people don't fully understand is some of the mathematical odds of even proteins functioning, forming by chance. So I've heard it. The odds of a protein forming by chance is 1 in 10 to the 74th power. What would you say to
That
that?
that is a huge, huge number,
Yeah.
for folks who who don't follow math like us, just very simply,
By the way, I'm not a
10,
mathematician.
yeah,
I,
neither
I,
of us.
I quote Peter Stoner, who is a mathematician. So,
Peter Stone, yeah.
yeah.
So, for example, 10 to the third power would be 1,000.
Mhm.
10 to the sixth power would be a million. So a one with that many zeros. So imagine 10 to the 74th, one with 74
Mhm.
zeros
Yeah.
after it. Man, we can't even fathom a number like that. So just for a protein, and that doesn't even approach life, the origin of life,
Yeah.
one protein, one chance in 10 to the 74th power. I mean, how big is that number? It's just mind-boggling.
Just for a protein, not even a cell, just a
That's right.
protein. Yeah. I've heard it described as an analogy for that as blindfolding a man and having him successfully find one atom searching the entire galaxy. That's how huge that number
Hmm.
is. So it's massive. I guess the point of it is that at the end of the day, math pretty much says evolution, macro at all, and I won't use the other term because you like the term adaptation,
Uh-huh.
which I
Uh-huh.
do too. But it literally via math is an impossibility for macro evolution to occur. So we can rule that out. In previous segments, we had gone into pretty much in depth of how evolution is an impossibility. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Anything additional, Doc, that you'd like to share with us or plug your work or anything? Happy to
Yeah.
have you do that if you'd like to.
Oh, thanks so much. No, I'm just happy to be part of the podcast, and it's
Hmm.
great to just get this information out because, so many, even people who have become Christians and apologists, will admit, hey, I started out as an evolutionist.
Yeah,
And this kind of stuff that we're talking about, I just never heard growing up. I never heard it in school. You
yeah,
can imagine my education as a physician was highly steeped in evolution.
sure.
And once I started to hear some facts on the other side, I thought, well, boy, this makes an awful lot of sense. And
Hmm.
evolution doesn't seem to be consistent with science. So I think
Yeah,
that's going to be our role in our apologetics here.
yeah. It's interesting you say that. I tell people often start with the Bible and you'll find science catches up.
Yeah.
It's always behind. They'll say I say they skeptics will say, well, science said this and the Bible can't prove it, and so many try to make their theology match the science of the day
Hmm.
when it's just a theory. But if you start with the Bible, you'll find out that it had it right all along. So always
And
start
so,
there.
yeah, and science has been even things that are, virtually certain.
Mhm.
There were times in the past that things were certain and science changed.
That's
They
right.
said, oh, well, we thought it was this way, but now it's actually this way.
That's
And that's
exactly
just,
right.
like Darwin said, feeble man, fallible man.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just where we
Yeah,
are.
not to be too rough on Darwin, he didn't have
No,
the
no,
electron microscope, so
that's right.
if he did, he might have seen things a little different, maybe.
That's right.
I'd like to think he would have anyway. But,
Mhm.
anyways, thank you for your time. This has been very insightful. I'm sure our audience will thoroughly enjoy it and give it more meaning to what segment 10 provided. So, thank you so much. And to our friends out there, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.